that's what we're working on.
Ooh. Sorry about that. I forgot.
So here's a little overview of what we are going to do tonight. So we're going to talk about what redistricting is and why we do it, why it's important to obviously to have these fair districts, what the new rules and the timeline are for the new maps, and most importantly, how you all can help us get there. So one caveat I like to make at the beginning is that we're going to kind of jump back and forth between the state districts and the congressional or federal districts for Ohio. So we kind of go back and forth throughout the presentation about what we're talking about, and I'll try to make it as clear as I can. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about the congressional districts. So this would be our representatives in the House of Representatives. And you have to understand what apportionment is. And it's apportionment happens after the census. So every 10 years we do the big census. And apportionment is the divvying up of the seats in the House of Representatives to roughly give each state, you know, a representative number of people, a number of seats in that house. There are 435 of these seats, and they try to make sure that each seat represents roughly the same number of people. Unfortunately, of course, there are going to be some states where they just don't even have enough people to equal that approximate number. But each state gets at least one seat. So you'll see over here, you've got South Dakota, Wyoming, some of these very, very sparsely populated states. They only have one seat. And of course, California has a big old chunk over here on the right side. So just as an example for you to understand, in 1790, each member of the Congress represented about 34,000 people. And today they represent over 710,000 people. So each one of these dots is 710,000. And we did officially find out about a month ago that Ohio is losing one of our congressional district seats because our population is dropping. And so now we're down to 15 congressional districts in Ohio, which means we actually absolutely have to redraw the maps because we have one less district and we have to redivide everybody into 15 districts. So that's the way that the states are divided up and represented within the House of Representatives in the congressional districts. Now, Ohio is a little bit different. It's the districts are defined by the Ohio Constitution. And essentially what they say is that there will be 33 Senate districts and 99 House districts. And this is what the maps look like right now. And if you can tell real quick here in the Senate district map, you can see that one Senate district might be, for instance, this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 counties. And those 7 counties make up several different House districts. So that's how Ohio is divided up into their district maps. So what exactly is redistricting? This is the basis of this entire talk. And essentially what redistricting is when you take the census and you look at a set geographical area, you want each of the districts within that map or that state to represent roughly the same number of residents. And that is called the principle of population equality. It basically means that, you know, each representative is going to represent approximately the same number of people. Now, obviously, we can't draw the map so that there's exactly the same number in every single district, and it would change literally immediately as soon as somebody moves or passes away or is born. But we try to start out that way every time there's a census. Now, over the next 10 years, you'll see this middle example is how the different districts start to divide up. One district will lose more people than another district will gain more people. And so it starts to become more and more uneven. And therefore, the representative who is representing this district is representing way more people than the one who's representing this district. So it's very unfair, and we have to basically readjust. So after the census, the maps get redrawn to once again try to achieve that principle of population equality, to get to the point where approximately each district has around the same number of people. So that's what redistricting is. And again, it happens every 10 years. So here's the important part about that. The majority party in charge, at least up until this year, has basically been able to draw these maps however they wanted without hardly any oversight. So we'll discuss a little bit about what the maps look like right now and how they ended up that way. But essentially, whatever party's in power is going to do their best to draw these maps in their favor. And that's what is the basis of gerrymandering. That's what gerrymandering is when you draw a map to favor one party over another. So how is that possible? How can they do that? So this example there's a lot going on, so I understand it was a little bit of an assault on the eyes, but basically we figured the best way to give an example of this is by using cats and dogs, because hopefully they're about as nonpartisan as you can get, although I do think there are some people who feel pretty strongly about cats versus dogs. But say you have 50 animals in a population, and 20 of them are cats, while 30 of them are dogs. If the maps were drawn to achieve perfect representation, you would get 2 cat districts and 3 dog districts, because each district has 10 people in it. But that almost never happens. Obviously, all the cats would have to be living together in exactly the same place. And there are many other factors that prevent this kind of representation and this kind of map drawing from happening. So whoever is in charge, say the dogs are in charge, they have the majority. What they want to do is make sure that they receive more districts than the cats. They want the majority of the districts. And because they already are in the majority, they are able to draw the maps in such a way that each district has slightly more dogs than cats, giving them essentially ownership of those districts and representation from those districts. And therefore, when the dogs are in charge, they've drawn the maps to have 5 dog districts and no cat districts at all. So essentially the cats have no voice, they have no voting power. And what they consider that process of dividing up the cats so that they are a minority in every district, they call that being cracked. They're cracking up the cats so they can't join together and have any kind of political force. But then what's even more devious in a way is the next example, when the maps are drawn in such a way that it gives the cats a majority. And you think, how in the world can the cats get a majority? They have, only 20% or 40% of the total number of people. Well, what they're doing when they drew the map is they packed all the dogs as much as possible. They packed as many dogs as they could into 2 of the districts, giving the dogs a majority in 2 of the districts. But then they only had a minority of dogs left for the other 3 districts, giving the cats 3 districts out of 5 and then a majority in this region. So that's called packing, when you pack the majority party into a few districts so that they get ownership of those districts, but they don't have a majority in the whole. And that is essentially what has happened over the last 10 years. So that's the kind of quick and dirty way of describing how these maps can be drawn to favor one party over another, especially favoring a minority party over a majority party. So what is so bad about gerrymandering? So many things. It's just awful. And it's just sort of a domino effect. So essentially, when a district has been gerrymandered, it becomes a safe district. So if anyone is familiar with some of the really, really gerrymandered districts in Ohio, for instance, Ohio District 4, the representative from Ohio District 4 has never had a serious opponent. He has always won with such a vast majority that he doesn't have to worry about ever really losing his seat, or he hasn't anyways, the way that the maps are drawn right now. And so his district is safe to him. He knows he's going to win every time. And that makes him very unresponsive, especially to people not of his party and people who wouldn't vote for him anyways. He doesn't have to worry about catering to the opposite party of his. You know, he doesn't have to worry about trying to cater to even the middle vote, because he has the vote of the majority party, and the way that his district is drawn, he's always going to win. So what do you think that does to the people in his district that aren't of his party? They get pretty disengaged. You know, trying to call him or trying to get him to listen to you is pointless because he doesn't need to keep his seat. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of really altruistic politicians. You know, a lot of what drives them to do anything is keeping their power and keeping their seat. And if you are not key to that, then they don't need to listen to you. So in these districts, what ends up happening is that the primary becomes really the only real contest, because the district is designed in such a way to favor that one party. The real contest becomes between members of that party. So only if there's a primary is there really any kind of sort of competitive election. But what that does is these competitive primaries that benefit extreme candidates, because they're trying to be even more, you know, to the right or even more to the left than their candidate, so they can get more, or than their opponent, so they can get more votes. So that creates these extreme candidates that end up winning, and then they're basically assured their primary election or their general election because the district has been drawn to favor them. And as I'm sure you all have seen, extreme candidates who cannot compromise, it leads to dysfunctional government, which serves absolutely no one. And it really becomes impossible to make progress. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing that with issues that you wouldn't have thought 10 years ago would have been anything but bipartisan. And now we're having extreme opposition to things that should be beneficial for all. So that's what's so bad about gerrymandering and why we're trying to stop it. So here's a couple, this is what the Ohio, the congressional map for Ohio. So these are our federal districts. This is what they look like right now. And I was talking about Ohio District 4, which we have affectionately called the Duck District because it looks like a duck, and extends all the way from northern Lorain County way out here to a tiny little bit of Mercer County, which is practically in Indiana. So this district has been drawn in such a way as to greatly favor the Conservative Party and disfavor the liberal parties. So that's one way that you can see that this this map is drawn in a really unfortunate way. And what ended up happening is that in 2011, after the last census, the party in charge, the majority party, was the Republican Party. And there were no rules necessarily about how to draw these maps. There was no requirements for public input or anything. So basically, the map makers kind of got together nearly in secret, pounded out this map, and it was designed specifically to give the Republicans 12 seats in Congress and the Democrats 4. And over the last 10 years, it has proven to be unshakable. No matter how Ohio has swayed, whether it's swayed more Democratic or swayed more Republican in general voting, we have always maintained 12 Republican seats in Congress and 4 Democratic seats. So an example of the packing that I talked about is the 4 Democratic seats and districts in Ohio. You can see 1 for Cleveland, 1 for Columbus, 1 for Cincinnati, and then there's the snake on the lake, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is Marcy Kaptur's district. I live in this district, and it's gathering all the majority or more mainly Democratic cities along the lake, all in one big long district. And that way, none of these Democratic kind of strongholds, or whatever you want to call it, can affect the more conservative districts around them. So that's how they've managed to stay in power with this 12-4 split, because they designed the map to specifically retain that split no matter what happens. So here's the problem with that. This is what Ohio's actual voting results look like. So when you look at Ohio and you look at what Ohioans vote in the elections since 2012, in the congressional elections, we're really much more purple than we are red. We're slightly more conservative with 55% voting generally Republican and 45% voting generally Democratic. But when you look at our representation, we're represented by 75% Republicans and 25% Democrats. And that's clearly not representative democracy when the state itself has at least 20% more people who are Democratic than are being represented by a Democratic representative. So that's the Congress, that's our congressional seat. In the Ohio State House, it's very similar. It's not quite as egregious, but it's very close. Once again, whenever Ohio votes for state house elections, we vote generally 55-45, but we're represented in the Ohio State House 64% by Republicans, 36% by Democrats. So again, it is not representing Ohio voters as a whole. And that's what we want to avoid. That's what the maps should make sure happen, that when the maps are drawn, that our representatives reflect what Ohio actually looks like when we vote. So we're going to look a little bit at Congressional District 9, the snake on the lake. So obviously, as I mentioned, all of these kind of larger chunk of Cleveland, chunk of Toledo, bits of Lorain County, Sandusky, all these towns, Port Clinton, all these towns that are all along the lake, they're slightly larger cities. Cities tend to be more liberal, more democratic. They've all been packed into this one extremely long district that actually isn't continuous, because you actually have to cross water or other districts to get from one part of the district to another. So it's bad in that way. But on top of that, we have one representative, Marcy Kaptur. She is trying to represent people from this vast majority of different kinds of backgrounds and industries and interests. So how can she represent the people that she covers in Cuyahoga County, who are very science oriented and manufacturing oriented, while also representing people in Erie County who are big farmers? I mean, how can she be that person for everyone? And it's very difficult, but that's what happened when they drew the maps. They just shoved all of these Democratic cities together so that they could not influence any other districts that they could be part of. So it's not a great situation for anyone. And, she has a very hard time representing all of her constituents because they are so vastly different in different areas. Another way of looking at these maps is looking at, these would be Ohio's congressional districts from 2002 to 2012, so before the last maps were drawn. And then this is an example of the new map. So you can see even in our past map, the one from 2002 to 2012, the districts were at least slightly more fairly drawn. You can see that Franklin County, which is where Columbus is, it's divided into 3 different districts, but those districts also kind of pull in some of the more conservative counties or areas around them. So it's a mix. It's not just all conservative or all Democrat or all liberal. It's a mix of different political views together in these different districts. But when you look at the new maps, the maps that we have now, you can see that they packed as many people as they possibly could from Columbus into one district. And then they just cracked apart the edges and grouped them with a huge number of conservative areas to make sure that these districts would basically wipe out any sort of Democrat or liberal vote from the areas that they took from Columbus. So this was very deliberately done. And a way that you can kind of see how this works is if you look at District 15, which in the past was just Union, Madison, and a bit of Franklin counties, and now is 9 counties or more. In the past, if you'd have taken the votes in this area for Obama, he would have won by almost 10% over McCain, versus the new maps where he lost by almost 10% to McCain. So that's just a very clear example of how drawing these maps can drastically change the voting patterns of those districts. So the question is, where are we now? Well, not a whole lot has changed. We still have these the congressional district map and the Ohio State district maps. They're still in place, but they have to be changed. They are not allowed to be used in 2022 per our amendments and per the Constitution. What is really great is that because Ohioans have wanted new maps and because of coalitions like Fair Districts, we have new laws and we have new rules about drawing the maps. A lot of other states, they have the same ugly, unfair, gerrymandered district maps, but they have no new rules in place. They have not moved to pass reforms, and therefore they will likely end up with extremely gerrymandered maps again after this census comes out. So unfortunately for them, they're still going to be fighting these same battles, which is almost like beating your head against a wall when the basis of your representative democracy is unfair. But we, thankfully, have our new rules, and so we're going to take a little bit look at the rules, the timeline, the census, which of course is all in flux right now if you've been following the news at all, and hopefully get you some action items that you can do to help us make this happen. So first and foremost, there are some new rules that apply to both the Ohio State House district maps, the Ohio State and Senate district maps, as well as the congressional maps. So we're going to talk about those first. These rules apply to both maps. Essentially, the rules state that these districts have to be drawn compact and contiguous. So no more snake on a lake. This is not compact and is not contiguous. This is a nightmare. So they have to be drawn preferably really on county lines as much as possible. So keeping counties whole as much as we can, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, using city and county border lines to draw these maps, and to make sure that people all in one district who have mostly the same sort of industry or the same sort of concerns and issues that they need to be represented about are packed together. So for instance, this is just to show you what contiguous and not contiguous is. You can't have part of one district stuck in between another district or within some other district. And then we would consider that kind of a donut where one district is completely encompassed by another. That's absolutely not allowed any longer. Also, one huge thing that, one huge rule that has passed for both these maps is that public hearings are required. And as I mentioned, in 2011, no public hearings were required and no public hearings happened. These maps were drawn basically in secret. They came out, went straight to the vote, and were passed without anyone knowing what was happening. So the public hearings are things that we're working for and working toward getting set up so that we can have some say in what these maps look like. So specifically, the new rules for the Ohio House and Senate maps involve things like nesting. So each Ohio Senate district has to consist of 3 contiguous Ohio House districts. So it probably was kind of hard to see from my original Ohio House map that not necessarily the Senate districts didn't necessarily consist of 3 contiguous Ohio House districts, but that is how it's going to have to be now in the future. which is great because when they're drawing the House districts, they have to follow these rules to prevent more gerrymandering. And therefore, by default, for the most part, the Senate districts will also be mostly not gerrymandered. It's really interesting that in the new rules for the House and Senate for Ohio, they actually have stated in these rules that that no plan shall be drawn to favor or disfavor a political party. Like, it's actually stated in there, which means it's something that could be challenged should a map pass that does clearly favor one party over another. Somehow, some way, if that happens, then this rule allows interested coalitions or parties to be able to take the map to the Supreme Court and say, we believe this is still gerrymandered, and that is in flagrant violation of the anti-gerrymandering rule. So it's very important. And then they have to have representational fairness. So they have to reflect what Ohio's voting record is, which we'll go back to this map here, or sorry, this graph. They have to have representational fairness. So the maps can no longer be so flagrantly, advantageous to a party when that's not how Ohio votes. So the maps have to look more like this graph than this, and which is what they look like now. So it's really important that that has been built into the rules, and basically from now on forever, every time they draw these maps, they have to go back at the last 10 years of general election results, look and see how did Ohio's voters actually vote when it came to one party over another, and then the maps have to reflect that. So it's kind of nice because as Ohio potentially moves towards one political party or another, then the maps themselves also have to move that way, so that at least Ohio is represented appropriately in their districts. So in Ohio, there's a redistricting commission. And one of the action items that you can do right now is you can request free postcards, and each person can send up to 9 postcards to mostly they're the folks that are on this redistricting commission, and then a couple other people, like your personal representatives there in the Senate and the State House. And it's all about getting them to move on the redistricting process. And so the redistricting commission obviously involves a majority of the majority party. So you've got the governor, the auditor, the Ohio Secretary of State, then of course the leaders of both the House and the Senate, which will all be the majority party. But then you've also got some folks from the minority party. And the best part about it is that these 2 minority members, they have veto power over the map. They have to agree to the map in order for it to move forward in the most advantageous way for everybody. So even though they're minority, they have a very strong power in that veto. So when we get to the end, I'll talk to you about a little bit more about the postcards that you can send. For Congress, the congressional districts, some of the new rules, they do rein in the worst excesses of gerrymandering by making sure that there's a bipartisan map making process. And we'll kind of gloss over that. It's a pretty convoluted set of steps to get the maps passed, but it does require bipartisan agreement on the maps, which is really important. There's a limit on splits, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means here in a second, which basically in essence is you can only split so many counties so many times, instead of just however many times you want to split up as many people as you want. There has to be transparency. So once again, we have to have some public hearings about those maps, and the public has to be allowed to participate. One of the unfortunate things is that in the new rules for the congressional district maps, there isn't anything specifically stating that it has to, that there's an anti-gerrymandering rule. There's nothing specifically stating it, but these additional limits will really help reduce the possibility that it could be gerrymandered. So for instance, when we talk about the splits, so basically the new rules for the congressional redistricting maps, they really emphasize the counties, as I mentioned, as the building blocks. So they actually have it written out that at least 65 of Ohio's 88 counties absolutely have to be all within one district. They can't just go into a very sparsely populated county and divide it up by 2 or 3 different districts just to make sure that there are more of one party or another in those districts. They can't do that any longer. So 65 counties must remain whole. Up to 18 counties may be split, but only once. And that doesn't mean that 18 counties have to be split. They're just saying that's the max. If you split up to 18 of them more than once, or just once, so that they get split into 2 districts, that's it. You can't do any more. And then 5 counties may be split twice, but not more than that. So for instance, you see in this photo or this image here, this is Cuyahoga County, and it is split into 4 different districts right now. And that is simply because of the packing and cracking technique. So they've packed a lot of the county into the 11th district, the 9th district, and then this 14th district, you know, they grabbed a couple of spots here and there, and then they've just grouped it with a whole lot of folks over on the east side of Ohio. So this won't be allowed in the future. Another quick example is Mercer County, which is not exactly hugely populated, but it's split into 3 different districts for some reason, and that's not going to be allowed any longer. Summit County, I believe, actually is split into 4 districts for whatever nefarious purpose. It seemed to have worked, but this again, not going to be allowed. So when it comes to the congressional map making process, this map has, or this slide has a lot of information on it. I don't want to get too in depth. I just want you to realize that there are multiple stages that have the maps have to go through to get passed, and they have different deadlines. The first deadline is September 30th, and the most effective and bipartisan way of passing the map would just be to have that our General Assembly passes it with a 60% vote, and of that 60%, 50% of the minority party has to be in favor of it. So that way it makes it bipartisan. And if that happens, the governor signs it and it moves forward. If that doesn't happen, then there's another stage where they have to still have some bipartisan agreement to get a 10-year map. So there's multiple stages. The very last ditch effort is a not quite bipartisan, or not a very bipartisan process, but it only produces a 4-year map. And we've been assured by the Fair Districts folks that most folks in the General Assembly would not favor a 4-year map, even the majority party, because they don't know if they'll still be in the majority party in 4 years. They don't know if they'll still be in power. So they wouldn't want to take the chance of having the maps be redrawn without their excessive input. So hopefully the General Assembly will get through this process and produce a 10-year map, and it'll be bipartisan, and there's multiple steps involved. So this slide is a little out of date, because yesterday we found out that the Census Bureau is going to release the census data mid-August, which is good to some degree because it gives us at least a little time to start using the data to put the maps together. But one thing that Fair Districts did not want was they didn't want the census to be rushed. They didn't want that data to be rushed because it's the basis of everything for the next 10 years. So they were not a fan of rushing the Census Bureau. However, I'm sure you've seen that there have been some representatives who have tried to get some things passed and some stuff done to try to basically pressure them to get this data released. And so they've come out and said they will be releasing it at least by mid-August, which gives us about a month to a month and a half to get the maps drawn. But what do we do about these deadlines? What if that's not enough time? Essentially, what Fair Districts wants to do is get the Supreme Court to either be lenient about the deadlines, maybe give us a month of leeway, instead of being very strict about making sure that they have to have these maps in place by a certain timeline, or maybe just developing a new timeline. Regardless, these maps have to be in place by early next year at the very latest, because we've got, a new primary happening in the spring. We have less congressional districts, so we have to reformat the entire map for Ohio's congressional districts, and then the candidates need to know who it is they're representing and start campaigning. So the maps have to be redrawn, and they will be redrawn. We just don't want them to rush it as much as possible. So we're trying to get them to start having public hearings now to talk about timelines for the map making, to talk about ideas for where to draw the maps and how to draw the maps, to start talking about it now and get things in place. So as soon as we have the data, we can finally move forward on drawing the maps. And that's part of what you can help us with. So one last question that some folks have is, what about the Supreme Court? So, why hasn't the Supreme Court done something about these awful maps already? And basically in 2019, there was a case that was brought to the US Supreme Court, basically saying that the partisan gerrymandering that they see in these maps and that everybody sees in these maps really falls outside the purview of the federal courts. They believe it is a state issue, and they have to work it out at that level. So unfortunately, that was a big blow to us. We really were hoping that the Supreme Court would be on the side of stating that gerrymandering is terrible, and they agree it is, but there's nothing they can do about it. So the good news is that once we have these new maps, we can take them to the Ohio Supreme Court if they need to be challenged. If something comes out of this mess and they seem still very gerrymandered, then these coalitions and anyone actually interested could take it to the Ohio Supreme Court and try to fight it. So what can you do? You can take action. And now I'm hoping that Rob will be able to grab some links and throw them in the chat, and we will actually be sending you an email after this, probably to Susie, with a lot of these links and quick links to other action items that you can take. Essentially, we're trying to get in the ear of everyone involved, from the governor on down, to say, we want you to be doing something about this now. Don't wait until mid-August. I mean, it's already past the middle of May. We need this to happen now because we can't rush these maps. So getting out there and talking to Governor DeWine, either via email or by phone, talking to your map makers and legislatures, get started on the redistricting. You can write a letter to the editor. I've done that several times. It's very easy. And a lot of times these sites, they have letters that are pre-written, and you can modify them if you want, or you can just put your name on them and send them into your local newspapers. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, our representatives won't really do anything unless they're being called out about it in public. So that's one good way to get noticed and get this information out there. You can order these redistricting postcards. So this is what I was talking about earlier. These postcards, they will send you packs of 50 or 100, however many you want. And each person can send up to 9 of them, because we don't want the same person sending postcards over and over and over again. But you've got potentially 9 representatives that you can send these to for each person. So if you've got a group of people and they're great at writing postcards and sending them out, that'd be a wonderful thing that you could help us do. We've already sent a big group of these out from my group, and we're really trying to make sure they understand that we're watching and we want them to get started on this process. Of course, you can always donate. They have to buy those postcards, and there will be some yard signs coming out soon. They do have some staff that have to be paid to do this, because they're basically full-time working on this process. So donations are always appreciated. And one thing we want everyone to do, and this will be also again in the link in the email that we sent, is follow fair districts. Basically get on their email list so that they can let you know when stuff is happening. They will let you know. For instance, I found out from this email list about the census data being released in mid-August yesterday. So we want you to know about it. We want you to know when there are public hearings finally scheduled. We want you to know what we're hearing from the representatives and the legislators. So definitely get on the email list. If you'd like to give presentations like Rob and I are doing, you're welcome to join our speakers bureau, because we're giving these presentations all over Ohio, and I can do it right here from my dining room. So it's wonderful. Watchdogging, I know you guys are already doing that when it comes to the education issues that you're worried about. So you can hold your legislators accountable by writing letters to the editor, basically just calling them, emailing them. If you find that they seem to be pretty active on Facebook or their other social medias, you can get on social media with them. One thing we're also really, really trying to do is demand virtual testimony. We've been doing this for several months, trying to get the Ohio legislature to allow virtual testimony. I mean, the fact that you all have been so successful getting people to be able to be there in person is wonderful. But I mean, it's just so hard to take time off and go down to Columbus, and then you're there waiting for your session and they cancel it or whatever reason. And so it's just ridiculous that they can't allow virtual testimony, especially after a year and a half now of everyone being virtual everywhere. So that's one thing that we're trying to get folks to pressure the legislature to allow. And then if you're someone who really just finds these maps very interesting and really likes to maybe even put puzzles together or look at data and try to figure out the best way to draw these maps, there are actually community map making software that you can use, and you can get involved in these map making competitions to really put together ideas for how the maps should be drawn, even if it's just your little county or especially because y'all are in, over there in Cuyahoga, your county will get split up, and these map making resources are ways that you can help put together ideas to say, look, we know you're going to split up our county, but we don't think that Slavic Village shouldn't be split down the middle. It's its own community, and here are the outlines of that, and here's why it's its own community, and really make it clear which places should be kept together and represented together. And they need people from those communities to do that, because otherwise it's folks in Columbus who know nothing about your town splitting up basically your town into different districts. So that's another way that you can get involved. So there's a much more of these links, and what we'll do is we'll also send this presentation if you want, which these links are live within the presentation, so that kind of helps too. So that is pretty much my spiel. I'm going to stop sharing, and then Rob, if there are questions that need to be answered that you haven't had a chance to talk about, or if anybody has more questions, all ears. I've got 7 minutes to spare.
I don't see any more really on the chat that I haven't tried to answer already, but
Okay, good.
Others can speak up now.
I'm really interested in the community map making process and how that really influences things. And is that something a group like ours should do?
I believe so.
Good project.
Yeah, I went to a couple of the community map making training sessions, and I mean the software that they have available is so amazing. You can go online, it's a free software. It's actually called District R. I think Rob can probably find it and put it in the chat. They have a couple different programs, but I was using District R, and it is so incredible. You can go in and zoom in right into your community. You can highlight things that you feel are important, that are pillars of your community. You can draw and select different sections to say, this is what constitutes my community. And they would have more information about how that information gets to the map makers. That's the part I'm a little unclear about. But it does, and they definitely want people who live in these communities that are going to be basically split up. I mean, you know, they I live over here in the very, very western edge of Lorain County. My parents live in Erie County. We're not worried about being split up. Erie County's not getting divided, but you know, Cuyahoga County will. So it would be really good for them to know where you guys believe your communities are and make sure that your communities get to stay together.
So Kate, I played around with that district art. It really is a lot of fun. I love doing that kind of stuff.
Isn't it?
But what I'm curious about, so I actually didn't look at the community one. I looked at the districts, like looking at the state and the congressional districts. Are those things that are going to get to anybody? Like it says you can save them and stuff, but is that going anywhere? Is it something that anybody's going to look at and say, oh, you know, somebody in
Right.
Cleveland Heights, whatever, said that, you know, this was a good way to do it versus that. Is it
Right.
really worth?
I think what we should do is get you more information about the map making contest. I don't know why they call it a contest, but I think that's where, you know, District R is sort of like a practice. You know, you go in, you make your districts, you're trying to make them about equal, and then you can take that to this map making, to these map making contests, and that's where they get shared. But there's definitely more information about that on the Fair Districts website, and you can get into the training sessions and stuff, and they can talk to you about how those work. But yeah, they definitely want that information, but yeah, just saving it in the program doesn't go anywhere. You have to be kind of part of the bigger picture. And that's how getting involved in that map making stuff. That's
I would contact someone at Fair Districts and say, you want to be a leader in your community to draw a community map? Because there's many communities that are drawing maps. And then I think they're going to try to link those together in some way so that when people make the district maps, they'll know not to divide these particular communities. So on the Fair Districts website, there are email links to the leaders. And I would say, if you want to be a leader for your community, just say, I'd like to join the community map making and be a leader and get other people involved to draw that community map.
Yeah, definitely. They'll be excited. Any other questions?
Has the commission been appointed?
I mean, the commission for the most part are people already in office, but then there's those few folks who get to appoint someone. And as far as I know, they haven't moved forward on anything yet. That's why we're constantly bothering them, because I mean, even that, who knows how long that would take for them to appoint someone. You know, they haven't released the funds that need to be released to make this happen. They haven't done anything, and it's very frustrating.
And that's what the postcard campaign is really
But
about.
that's part of it. Yeah, it's just to say, we're watching. We don't want you to wait to the last second. Get on this, make it happen. Just one more way that they can be inundated with like reminders every time they're in their office that, yeah, you have to do this really important thing and you shouldn't wait till the last second to do it.
Kate, you will send one of the leaders of the group your presentation, the PowerPoint, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because people asked to have that.
Yeah, once you send it, my email's in the chat, or you can send it to Susie, who will send it to me, but I'll send it out to, because people registered, so I have addresses, and then I can also link to wherever we're going to post this video. I'm hoping that it's clear to everybody that the link, I know it was way in the beginning of the presentation, but the importance for all kind of fair legislation is based on fair districts. And I think what Kate said in the very beginning is really worth repeating, and that is that when you have a safe district, you get the most extreme people being elected from those places because they're trying to win the primary and they don't care about the people who aren't in their party. So to me, that's really what the biggest problem here is, that because the technology has allowed such extreme gerrymandering nowadays, it really has exacerbated the problem. Now, I wonder, on those map making tools, do they tell you where all the Democrats live and where all the Republicans live, or not? Because I'm sure that the one that is being used by the the legislators that are doing this have that information.
Yeah, I think it's loaded with the last census data or, so yeah, you can go in and it'll tell you how the percentage, it even tells you ethnicities. It's really interesting. You just pick a section of and make a district and it'll tell you, okay, this district is so much percentage one party over the other, so much percentage ethnicities. It's really,
Wow.
yeah, it's
A lot of
cool.
layers to it, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that anybody is really going to be looking at a regular person who submits a map? I mean, honestly, is there any possibility that that's going to be taken into consideration when they actually get down to nuts and bolts?
Well, I don't believe the legislature is going to care necessarily, but the coalition does. And the coalition is going to take that information to the legislature. So the coalition is asking people to do this because what they want that data so that they can go as this mega coalition of interested parties to the legislature and say, this is what your people are telling you. This is what we're gathering from the communities. This is what you need to listen to. And plus it's kind of part of the rules, there does have to be public input, so at those public hearings, if they completely disregard, whatever the coalition has brought forward as far as, this is how we think Cuyahoga County should be divided up, and we live here, and this is what we're telling you our communities are, then you'll have more basis to be able to say, we designed this already and you're totally disregarding it. And, I think it's all part of just having more and more resources and more ammo, pardon my pun, to take to them and say, we're trying to get people on the ground who actually live in these communities to help us draw these maps and not just people who live in Columbus and don't really know what's going on.
Also, if the legislators say they can't draw a particular map and you have 1,000 Iowans that drew that kind of map, that
Right.
doesn't work out.
Nice try. I saw somebody asked about the 9 postcards. Did you answer that, Rob?
No, go ahead.
So basically what they don't want to bother wasting the postcards on people that have no influence over this process. So there's the 7 members of the Redistricting Commission. So the governor, the auditor, the Ohio Secretary of State, the Speaker of the House, the head of the Senate, and then the 2 minority leaders. But then you also personally have 2 representatives that you can bother because they're your representatives. So that's where the other 2 come in. It would be your House representative and your senator. If your senator happens to be one of the people already on the commission, then you wouldn't send 2. You would, you'd send less. But that's why they don't want you sending more than the 9, because the only people that matter are the people on the commission or your personal representatives. Like it's not worth it to send it to some other representative because they don't care about you. You're not their voter. So it would be a waste of time. Anything else? Did it make sense? Y'all feel like you have a little bit more idea of what all this gerrymandering and redistricting is all about? Good. That's fantastic. So I guess if there's no other questions, we'll make sure that you guys, we get the resources to your coordinators here, and then they can get it out to everybody.
Ari is the coordinator, I think.
Yeah, send it to Ari. He's the communicator.
Oh, okay. Let me make sure I get his email. The communicator.
So